So here on page Samach Aleph, we're going to finish this now. And this is the end of this drush. And then the next drush is really rather delicious also. But it goes, you know, you have to think back of how much you knew about this subject to begin with, about what you know about the Kibarti and the Tipa that comes down, what you know about the creation of the beard of Zeranpin, and how it is that it calls and so on and so forth with the Hashem. Now we realize that part where you say, let's see, how's it go? The Vayaavor Hashem al panav vayikra. Hashem. That's as far as we've gotten. And there's lots of things there that we saw. Now we're going to see some other things. We're going to finish up. So he says, this is on page Samach Aleph. It says Kavana Gimel. It's the third Kavana that you can have with this name Hashem. Havaya Shniya, so let's say the second Havaya. Shehi Dalet Tikunin Tatoim the Dikna Dezah. Now we're in the beard of Zeranpin. And we have added on at least the illumination or the impression. It's a little more like temporary, but it's there. The four Tikunin, upper Tikunin, which is a Havaya. And now, though, he says something else. This is another Kavana. Another Kavana is that the second Havaya of the Dalet Tikuni at the time, the Dikna Dezah, that would be corresponding to the 9 of the beard, the bottom of it. Koral Havaya, it calling out to a Havaya. Sheyarid Medal Hibarti the Rif, that should come down from the 4 Hibarti of a Rif that were on the Oref of Zeranpin. So in other words, it's just telling you a different process that's going on at the same time as all of the other processes. Beyonce Habiderek upon him, and that part that can come out onto the face. So it's the bottom part. That's all he's really saying. He says that the bottom part of the beard of Zeranpin, which is permanent. Because Zeranpin's beard is, let's say, a Chagad 9. So this is the 9. So the 9 is calling for the Hivarti to pair up, to make all the action that it has to do. In other words, it's a complete call. This is what he's saying. First, he's saying that the first part is the Hivarti and the Tipa, that glow that's on the front of the beard, that's making the 4 top. That's calling up to the 4 top Sphira Tikunim of Erikanpin. That was the first one. The second one is that the Chagat of the beard of Zeranpin is calling. And the third one, there's another Kavana, not only of all of that calling to this, to this Hivarti and bring down light, all of them wants bright light brought down, so they're all calling. That is, the Chabad, Chagat, 9 of the beard of Zeranpin are all calling. They're all calling. That's Hashem. So now let's read this part. Kuf Yud Zayin. It says, Achar kach tekavein oid. So now I have this Kavana. Od Kavana Shlishis. Ki ha'avaya ha'shniya shebedal tikuni titoim shebeteish tikuni dikna dezah. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. I'm reading very fast. So he says the second havaya, which is the 9 of the beard, the tikdut of the shebedal tikunim tatoim. Once again, it's the yudke vavke, which is called the 9. It's the 9 of the beard of Zeranpin. It's called the shebeteish tikuni dikna Zeranpin. He kore el havaya the arba hivarti. It's calling that original havaya, the one that came out of the Dalet hivarti, achre reisha de Erikanpin, which is on the back of the reisha of Erikanpin, hanim shachik der achor, which comes back around the back of Zeranpin. And a lot of times we pronounce this, or a lot of people do, derech ach. Rabbi Mograbi, for one, is a person that does that. So we see that there's different kinds of shitas. Rabbi Memran says not important. He said hanim shachas derek ach ba'orev Zeranpin bo'overes and me'iraba, and it passes through there, which we know, and it comes into the malchim. B'harin is bar shlosha gavana. So that he said that's the third kavana. So basically, it's really the hivarti calling. The hivarti, what we say, whatever produces the 4 upper tikkunim of Zeranpin that calls. Then we also say, well, you know what? The Chagat of the original beard, it's calling too. And now we say that the 9 of the original beard is also calling. It's calling right to that Hivarti. Wants that Hivarti to break out. to be able to get onto the face, to bring down that shefa, and like that. So let's go to number Kuf Yud Zayin, and we'll read the light print in the Tibba Kavanos. So he said, Od Kavana Shlishis is a third Kavana. Machadish Rav, he also brings this new idea. Shagam Havaya Shniya, that also the second Havaya, what does he mean by the second Havaya? He says the second one of the Tesha Tikuni Dikta Zer Anpin, which are permanent. Shahavi calls Zaman, call Hazaman, Bizman, Lifnei Redis Adalachi Varti. So he's talking about the original that was there the whole time, before you had the beginning of the Chivarti coming in and the production of the upper four, the Diknas of Zer Anpin. Korigam. So this low level is also called the Tosefes Arab, seeking what? This is from the bottom to the top, seeking an additional amount of illumination. They want light. But it's not about low. It's not calling on the dikna of a rich, like was the case that we originally saw. Like the first Havaya calls to it, that is the Havaya that is produced from the Kibarti. He's calling on that Havaya, originally going way back. In other words, this is happening all at the same time to the Havaya, which is coming down the back of the head in Zer Anpin. Calling that one over there. That part that's around the back of the head of Zer Anpin, Shatavo, the Shakav. By Yadei came he above Mirabah. So that it should come forward, in other words, do its action. Everybody in the whole beard of, he's saying the whole beard of Zer Anpin is calling to build this light up. The Nifsa de Yesh Lanu Ke'ez Gimel Kavanas. Now he wants to say what the three Kavanas are. This is the Teva Kavanos telling us. Havaya Shaladala Chibarti. First one is the Havaya of the Dala Chibarti. Kora the Havaya Shaladala Dikundi Dikta de Erik Anpin, which is, it produces itself as Chibarti gets onto the face when it calls up to the other four of Erik Anpin. So then that should shine on. So he said, let's talk about the four tikkunim, which is the chagat of the tikkunim of Zer Anpin. In other words, his original 9. Also calling those upper 4 of the beard of Rich to shine too. So those 2 are calling to the upper beard of Rich. The third one, so the Vaya that has to do with the 9, which would be the 4 tikkunim down below, which is also Yud Kei Vav Kei, but it's considered in the position of the 9. Chorus the Havaya shall the Hibarti calls to the Havaya, which is the Hibarti, the Rich L'Hoyer bought to shine on. Fine, so he has something in the Shefa down below, just skip that. Now he goes to a different little piece here. Which he doesn't conclude. It just raises a little bit of appetite. That's about it. So now we want to explain. Here's an interesting thing that we have to understand. The Panemius is always inside of the Kitzonius. So he says that the light of the Havaya Derich inside of the B'chai Dezah. So then he says this. Inyan Harayo, because we said that we had 3 times 72 makes Rayo. It's a very interesting idea, which is Rayo is also Gematria Gevurot. Sheyesh beGevurah Dezah, V'Raya b'Malchus Dezah. So this Inyan is really not explained, I don't believe. Let's go to number Kuf Yotes in the light print, and it says V'Gam Nis Boyer L'Chol. So let me explain to you or show you. So he has to say this idea that the first 2 Havayos, which would be the Chabad and the Chagat of the beard of Erik Anpin, how they shine to the secondary Me'iros B'Shnei Havayos Hashnios Dezah. In other words, the Chagat, it is the Chabad, that's what it sounds like. He says the Chabad Chagat of the beard of Erik Anpin should shine on the Chagat Nai of Zer Anpin. He says, Abal Olam Enu Rak Teshin Tikuni Dikta Bizah, but there's only 9 in Zah. Ela Aros Haim B'Misbar Yud Gimel, but it's really, you have to understand, it doesn't mean that you're creating 13. So I guess he meant to say, let me go backwards. I was a little confused about this. I'd like to read it again. Okay, so that's Eric Anpin has a beard with 3 Havayos in it, one on top of the next. Let's say one inside the next, whatever you like. So they're shining, those upper 2 of Zer Anpin are shining into the lower 2 of Zer Anpin. That to me, that doesn't match up really well. That doesn't digest really well. But that's what he said. But the fact is, it's only 9 tikkunim in Zah. So what? So this is another fact. He said the tikkunim in Zah are really 9. But the fact is that when you get all this light shining on it, it has he says, Ela Shaha Aros Haim B'Misbar Yud Gimel Aros. But there are 13 different radiances coming out, not just 9. Kamoshi is Boyer Od, Bezat Hashem, we're going to get into it more, he says. So now he said, we explain to you, Rayo, how there is a Rayo in Gevurot. We know Rayo is Gamat Gevurot. HaZachar Shuhu Hazah. So Gevurah HaZachar, it's in the Gevurah of Zer Anpin. Ba'amnam Gam Yesh Bechinus Rayo, Acher, there's another Rayo besides that, El HaMalchus, that goes to Malchus. V'nimsha Gam Kain Min Dikna de Eric Anpin, and the whole thing comes out of the beard of Eric Anpin. V'hupa Ofen Zan, it goes this way. Amr HaKosef Chaim Shukachti, but then he says, I, Chaim Vital, Rabbi Chaim Vital, I guess I should say, I forgot. Tishlum Adrash there. So he says, I forgot it. You know, I tried to imagine what it was like for Chaim Vital. He was only with the Rav for a year and a half. Where did he meet him? You know, where did he get all this information? On what level do they communicate? Now, in Rabbi Mimran's book, which is really a good one, you know, he says that the fastest thing in the universe is thought. And it's like, I don't know, he had some kind of really, I don't know how scientists know this, or, you know, how you do it, but it's not, of course, not speech. But he says thought is the fastest, like 1/1,000,000th of a light year. Something like that. A light year is 1/1,000,000th of, I don't know, what it is. It's like 1,000,000 times faster than anything we can imagine. So, I don't know why I said that. Why did I say that? I don't know. We'll see if it has something to do with this. I was in a deep thought and I forgot it. Let's go to Kufya Test. Let's read what we can get out of this. So Od Maskem Harav. So as the Rav has finished this, about the Shnei Havayo Shal Erik Riach, that there are 2 Havayos. The top Havayo, the Haino Havayo Shal Dikta Dariach, Havayo Shal Hivarti Dariach. Oh, I misunderstood that. So I hope I'm not losing you too badly. I'll translate this, and I misunderstood it. It said, Od Maskem Harav. The Rav makes this conclusion, that the 2 Havayos, they come from a Riach. He's not talking about the beard of a Riach here. That's what I misinterpreted. He's talking about the Havaya. The Havaya shall Dikna the Riach, which is one of the elements, and the Havaya shall the Hivarti the Riach. Those 2 now are on the face of Zer Anpin, in the top 4 slots of his Tikkunim. He'ira b'shnei Havayos ha'shniyah shel Zer Anpin. So they shine. They're now the top part, so that's not really the top. This is another way of saying those 2 Havayos, which compose the Chabad of the beard of Zer Anpin, now have an abundance of light, and as a result of that, they shine down in the Shtei Havayos or Shniyos Shel Zer Anpin. That would be the Chabad and the Nai of Zer Anpin. So it's only one beard, but the top part of the beard now has these 2 big-time Havayos that came from Eric Anpin. And now there's an abundance of light, and it's shining downwards. This is basically what he's saying. Aval in Rosh Misbah Ha'aros He'ahu Yud Gimel, but he says, but despite the fact that you have 13 different ha'aros here, because the upper 4 are bright and shiny. And the other 2 sections down below, they were there all along. They're bright, but they're not shining like the one up and above. L'olam ein bezah Vayaavor, but you have to understand this. When you say Vayaavor, he only still has Teisha Tikkunim Dikna Bezah. He only still has 9 Tikkunim. So even though you have illumination that's so great, that's what you did. You added illumination with these 2 Havayas that came from a Riach. They're able to shine downwards, but they're not part of the beard, really. Something like that, he's saying. When Messiah Rav, the Kol Mashrin is Bar V'Perek Zeh, Huba B'Chinas ARI. So he says that everything that we have in this parak is all about the concept of Raya. So he said, B'Gevurah, and where is this Raya located? B'Gevurah Shalazachar Shu Zer Anpin, and the Gevurah of the Zachar, which is Zer Anpin. So he says, so then the last of it is, that's where it's located. Now that doesn't tell me too much. Not yet. Because we're going to get into some more other great things about Leah. After all, we're from the tribe of Levi. And Leah, I don't know if this is all going... Your father's name was Menachem ben Moshe?
Moshe ben Menachem.
Okay, Moshe ben Menachem. I'll probably get it straight sooner or later. But all of this is really coming out of that original, that original shear. So he says, now he writes this, so what one of the things that I want to understand, I need to understand, is what Raya is all about. Because this is like very, very important in all of the davening, but especially on Rosh Hashanah, but all of the davening, and since you are Rosh Hashanah, it should be important to you, but I don't know enough about it to be able to say, other than I know that it's Gematria Gevurah. It's made out of 3 Chasadim, and it's a Gematria of Gevurah. And it is the concept of a sweetened Gevurah. That's what you want. The world needs Gevurah. Quoting Rabbi Mimran, there's nothing wrong with Gevurah. It's only if it's not sweetened that it becomes a problem. So maybe the main thing that we want to do is sweeten those Gevurahs, and that's maybe why all of this drush that we're talking about, he says, is really about Raya. So he said, and also because the word Vayaavor has the word Raya in it. I just don't know all the parts. Mosif Diyesh Kam Od Kavana Cheres. Now he adds the Shal Raya. There's another Kavana over here about the Raya. So after the Habshacha comes from the Dikna, there Shal Erik Anpin the Malchus. So why is it going from Erik Anpin? I don't know. He means the Malchus. Yeah, but Silos, I don't know what he means. So there's a whole thing there, but he forgot it. He just to think of what he had to go through in order to get what he got. Ulam, that's what I was saying about the thoughts. How fast, that was what I was trying to say. How fast could they communicate? What kind of communication produces all of this depth in a year and a half? I told you the story about the guy that woke the ARI up.
I don't recall.
So it's like this. He's in Egypt. I have a little introduction which I'd like to read sometime to who the ARI was. I could just tell you real quickly. The ARI's father was, I think his name was Shalom. He was Ashkenaz. And his mother, they somehow, I just don't really understand, got involved with the expulsion from Spain. And they wound up in Egypt. And first they wound up in Jerusalem. And then after the bris of Shlomo of the ARI, which was the Sandik was Eliyahu Navi, whole story there. After that, they moved to, the father died. He died while he was still young, and the mother moved to Egypt, where her brother lived. And his name was something like Parnasah, which is Parnas, something like that. He was a very wealthy guy. And he took care of them, and the ARI eventually married one of his daughters. Something like that. That's what a little story that I heard there.
Married his cousin.
Yeah, married, that's what it sounds like. I could read it to you in the verbatim. It's a little hard for me to understand, but I think I got the basic idea. And that was his basic family. And there he was taken care of and supported. And the book that I have, which is called Sichos Yitzchak. It's a Yitzchak ben Zikri, where we went through his main work, Pachad Yitzchak, which is really the first 20 chapters of the Eitz Chaim. It's really worth it because it's what you call, like it's a Pirush Hood, like makes it easy to learn it. Anyway, he brings the history of Kabbalah in his book. It's not so easy for me to read, but he brings all these people, from the way back, all the people, the chain of events, Moshe de Leon, the Zohar, all of this stuff, and finally to the ARI. And so he learned over there under the tutelage of several rabbis, names that we should know, but I don't. And he was always called Yitzchak. He was always called the Ashkenazi. It was because his father was Ashkenazi. But he spoke Ladino, which was a language that everybody spoke then, some kind of a form of Spanish. And that's the beginning of his life. That's what I know about the beginning of his life so far.
In Alexandria or Cairo? Where did you go?
I really don't know. You want me to tell you a story that I heard, which I think has to do with this story, but I'm not sure. The stories I heard this on Hasidic Tales of Inspiration. I used to listen to their stories. And the man told this story. Now, the funny thing about it is, about Cubans, and like a lot of them are mixed in with Jews somehow. Unfortunately, some of them try to get back. You probably know that. Anyway, this guy was a competitor of mine. I met him at we used to chase fires, remember? So,
Sure.
So I met him at this fire. He walks up to me and he says, in the name of his boss, who was a guy that I know was a gambler. He really didn't know anything. He starts to tell me, he says, I'm going to tell you a story that my boss told me. So he said, the story goes like this, is that after the expulsion was very, very dangerous to get out of Spain. Because after a while, just to show everybody to leave it the same day. Some people got out early, but other people, getting everything together, trying to liquidate, can you imagine what a horrible thing this was? So here's a family that wound up, 3 or 4 people in squalor in Alexandria. They made it. They made it to there. But they had no money and Pesach was coming. So they couldn't buy matzah. It was like that. So they managed to beg, steal, borrow, whatever, just a few kopecks, just a little bit of money, enough to buy a little piece of fish and some matzah. And they would make it, they would make a Pesach. As the man is start to cry as I tell the story. As the man was on his way to the market, he passed the slave market, and he saw there that they were selling a 3-year-old girl, Jewish girl. She was one of the ones that didn't make it, and nobody wanted her. What are you going to do with a 3-year-old girl? And so he bought her with the little bit that he had. And he came back home, and his wife, everybody's hungry there. Everybody's upset because of the hunger, and they're hoping, he's going to come back, and everything. We have a beautiful Pesach, and he comes back with this little ragged girl. And she says, what is his wife's reaction to this? Another mouth to feed, and everybody is just, I don't know, can you imagine the scene inside of the house? Well, he leaves and goes outside, and he falls apart, and he realizes he's not going to have a Pesach, and he's got another mouth to feed that he can't, and he starts to weep. And he weeps until he can't cry anymore. And so he's in a crowded, slummy kind of area, and a man stops. And he said, look, I need a favor. So he says, what can I do for you? He says, listen, hold this. Another man's going to come by. And when he comes by, you'll give it to him. Okay? And he's broken, so he just takes it. So another man comes by, and he gives him the thing, and the man gives him a little bit of money. Thank you. It's more money.
Yeah.
And so After that, another man came. Every day people would come, and he became known as an Ish Ne'eman. So people brought him into this was a survival situation where people had to survive, and the man became extremely, extremely wealthy. And this was the beginning of a two-part story in the tales of Hasidic inspiration. The other part I really think is apocryphal, but I think that this one is leading up to the story. If it's not exactly something that happened, but it's something that could have happened, and maybe in fact did. That this man eventually, the little girl, they named her Mazal. And from that time on, he went up, just at each Ne'eman. Now, I think that somehow this may have something to do with the ARI, but I'm not sure because I don't know the lineage of this uncle, of his uncle. But the uncle provided for him everything that he possibly had needed in terms of the time that he needed. Now, the way I started this story was like this, because I was really talking about Chaim Vital. And the thing is, how in the world could Chaim Vital get all of this information like this in a year and a half? He was only there 2 years, 6 months. He claims, according to the Yitzhak Ben Ezri, that he actually was a student of the Ramak. I don't know. Yaakov Cronenberg says that the shmua is that Chaim Vital was the big time rabbi there. And when the ARI showed up, so the ARI first of all is taking a humble approach. He's a snua. And Chaim Vital says, why should I go visit him? Everybody says he's something. Why didn't he come visit me? He says he did that for 6 months. Until some things happened, which we have to research, that showed the ARI to who he was, and Chaim Vital came to him. And in a year and a half, he managed this, all that we see before us.
Amazing.
So the story, the metaphor for this, or the story behind this, is that the ARI was in Egypt. And he was a tremendous student. He learned with tremendous his mother. The Eliyahu Navi learned with him. He was his sandak. And the Eliyahu also appeared to his father, the Ashkenaz, and told him that that's what's going to happen. And so this man, he's in the Beis Medrash, and he's dozing. And a man is in the Beis Medrash, and he sees him over there on the bench, with his head down, and he sees he's whispering. He's talking to himself. He's talking. So he goes over and he puts his ear next to the ARI's mouth, and the ARI wakes up, and he says to him, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, Rabbi, I just couldn't believe what I saw here. I wanted to see what you were saying." The ARI said that if I had to tell you what I was saying, it would take me 60 years. So here we have this thing. We have this thing where this is such a tremendous depth that and we know, this is my thinking anyway, we know that the real energy of the universe is nothing, and that the closer you get to that, the smaller it gets. In other words, the smaller our grasp gets of it, because it's non-existent, and we're constantly talking about the borderline between existence and non-existence. Right? So we're always looking to track, but the fact is it's very small. Something really, really small means that in order to be able to develop that out so that it got out from your mind through all your processes and came out through your voice, okay, that takes 60 years, he says, to go through all that. So that's the reason why, that's why I think it's the reason why Rabbi Chaim Vital was able to get all of this, because it's like a door inside of a door inside of a door, and if you got to the original door, or right deep in that door, you've got a lot to do. Okay, so let me tell you another thing, and maybe sometimes we want to split this shir into 2 parts, so that we do one part of this, which we are on a regular basis, like a half an hour. If we can't do more, we would do another 15 minutes on something else. And there are a lot of things that we could do. One of the things is that would possibly be interesting to you is this shir that I've been trying to do in Parshas Pinchas. Parshas Pinchas is loaded. The story was that I went to Chaim Bar Mitzvah, Chaim Ash's son's Bar Mitzvah, and Chaim made sure that he sat me next to these guys named Grunberger. So who are the Grunbergers? That's the people from the Kabbalah Center. You know, we know some other names because we saw their books. There's a Red Dr. Berg and some other people. But basically, the Grunbergers are Hasidim. They come from Hasidic people, Heimish people. And so they have a branch of them that, you know, making money off of it. Okay? That's just what it is. Not to say that it's illegitimate, but I talked to him. So he said in the course of his conversation with me, because I know these guys know a lot of Zohar. I mean, a lot. So he said to me, well, you know, there's always Parshas Pinchas. It's so deep. He says this to me. You know what's in Parshas Pinchas? Oh, yeah, I know. So I decided that if I ever had a chance, I would try to learn Parshas Pinchas. And I got to a certain place.
That's what they give out to everybody. They give a small little blue book, and it's the Zohar and Parshas Pinchas.
Oh, wow. Well, I want to learn it in the Matak Midrash, which I got. It's very big. Okay. It's very big. But here's what's interesting about it. It really goes along with what I was saying. Is that it goes through at the place where I'm at right now. Mostly Rai Mahemna, but he's talking about the organs of the body and the kedusha that's in the organs and the different plays within the organ. For example, the liver is the seat of the Samach Mem. And then you have the lungs. So he's talking, and I pretty much got to the lungs, and I'm not too much further past it, which is like there's a lot of water in the lungs. So what does water do? Water is chesed. So you have to see how he's going that way. That maybe you might like to pick that up with me. That's one possibility. Another possibility is as if you're interested in meditation, which I am interested in, but I haven't been able to move myself, you know, to actually do it. Because this book by Rabbi Mimran is really a keeper. It's a cheap book. I made him a donation to help him try to get it into the second publication. He gives it out. I don't know how many people are really ready for this, but there are many different kinds of meditations that are tremendously helpful for prayer. I mean, and so that's another thing that I would like to do. And then, you know, there's other things. We mentioned tefillin the other day. Okay, I want to leave that with you and let you think about it. We're going to have a break, like you know, I'm going to Israel. And let me tell you something else. Just a little piece of Torah that you don't know. Because where you're at right now is that you are potentially really one of the great Kabbalists in my lifetime. And anyway, well, you missed the Otros Chaim. Because the Otros Chaim has got so many different things in it that you need to know, and in sequence. It's more complete than any other of the works of the Ri. However, you can access all of those things from here. But they're going, you know, they're somewhere else, but they bring in, like we just learned about the Kivarti. I didn't know all of those things. But I knew about the Kivarti because I've been through a lot. I've seen a lot of stuff. Well, here, let's talk about Leah. Now, we talk about, this is what you have to know that you missed. There are 3 olamos, let me see if it's 3 or 4. 3 olamos that come before the Olam Atiku. The first olam is called the Olam HaKudim. Olam HaKudim is where the aspects of physicality first start to bind together. And it gives birth from there into the Anekistonius, which is called the Olam HaNikudim. We know what Nikudim are, they're the dots, etc. And the Nikudim actually form themselves up, and if we had, we have to think about getting you some kind of visual display over there. But they form themselves up in the form of 10 Nikudim. There was a Kachav, and a Chabad, and a Kachav, I guess you would say, And there was a Das. Let me see, where was Das? How did Das work here? Anyway, there was a Chabad that were in a triangular formation in the head. And the next 7 spheros were in a straight line going downwards. So what happened was is that these Nakudos are all dinim. Now how you got to them being there and how they developed, that's all the details of this, but this is the part I want to tell you. So because of the fact that they're all dinim and there was no balance to them, they all broke, but they broke one at a time. So the first one was the which is called the king of Das. And Das broke, and everything that was inside of Das, because Das inherited the first 3. Das, that's where, let me start over. Is that the Kochav, which is in a triangular formation, so they worked together to a certain extent, they gave everything they had to Das. So Das, it was too much for Das, Das broke. So then Das, when everything was in Das, which is the upper 4, fell into Chesed, and then it fell into Gevurot, and then it fell all the way down until everything broke, basically. So that's a basic idea. So the question is, what broke? Well, it was the 7 lower spheros, starting with Das, going through Malchus. So what about the upper 3? What happened to them? Well, because they're actually inside of the other ones, they also suffered. So the Chochmah and the Bina fell down to the Karka of Atzilus. Can you follow this so far? Ask me a question if I'm not explaining it well enough.
I recall you learning this with the time many years ago. Yeah, I sent it to that share.
Okay.
I was
okay.
Part of it, not altogether.
Okay, so it broke. Okay, so what broke was the seven spheros fell out of Atzilus. In other words, they were not close to the Ein Sof like they were before. They fell out. And they went into Olamos Bia. But the other 3, that is the Kesser, the Chochmah, the Bina, they were all affected because they were inside of the others, and the Chochmah and the Bina were pulled down to the Karka of what has now been created, called Atzilus. So you don't only have an Atzilus because you have a Bia. Does that make sense?
So you only have Atzilus because you have a Bria?
A Bia. Well, Bia is Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. So we could call it Bria because Yitzir and Asiya is inside of Bria. So, or outside of it, whatever, however we have to think about that. But let's say, yeah. So what happened is that the 7 lower sphera Nikudim, they couldn't handle the light and they fell out of Atzilus. Until this time, there was no concept of Atzilus. That's what I needed to say. It was only the concept of the Nikudim, or what came before them, which was the Akudim. It was only the Akudim, the Akudim and the Nikudim, that's all there was. And now that the break has taken place, now there's a different categorization, which is called the Tzilus and Bia. Is that okay?
This goes back to the stripes and the spots of the flocks of Yaakov when he left the book.
Right? There's another one called Barudim, but we're not talking about that yet. So at any rate, we just want to know about the Shvira took place in Olam HaNekudim. And I described how the Shvira, so what happened is that both Chochmah and Bina were affected. And so I only want to talk about what happens to Bina. That the lower part of Bina, or the outside, the Hitzonius of Bina, falls down to the Karka of this newly imagined Atzilus. Karka of Atzilus, I mean the very bottom, the Malchus of Atzilus is where this falls down. And this is called Leah. Later on it's going to be called Leah. And this is the origin of Leah. Leah is the Acharayim of Bina. So the Acharayim, so the effect of the collapse of everything, like you're the skyscraper. And the first 3 floors, the penthouse floors, are all suspended by from up above, let's say. But the lower ones all collapse. So they're hanging in space there. And what happens is that the Acharayim of them falls down into the Karka of tzilus. They're all the way down at the bottom. Instead of being in the head, they're at the bottom. And a lot of the davening has to do with the resurrection of Leah, bringing Leah up to the place where she used to be, which we're calling now the Chazal Omal. Basically from the neck area down to the chest. She's going to be resurrected through our davening. I don't know if resurrection is the right word, but rehabilitated. And I'm thinking that what happens with Chochmah is that's going to be Yaakov, but I'm not sure that I remember that right now. Now this is a little introduction, and we're just, we've learned so long. Let's say we got another 5 minutes, okay? And think about these other things or something else you might like to learn. I think that would be good, personally, myself, to get into Parshas Pinchas, or really somebody needs to know and be learning. I don't know how much you're interested in meditation, but it can have a tremendous effect, which I'm lazy, and as long as everything's going good, I don't really bother myself, but I know that things don't always go good. And at that point, it could be really nice to have these tools. They're prayer tools. Let's see. And Rebbe Memran's, surprisingly really good. Let me see what we got here. We're on Drush base. Yosef Bebir Be'inyan Vayaavor. So he said the Nevayer Inyan Zeh Yosef Ba'orech. So you see that we're going to get into this concept deeper. He says, Da Sha'inyan Vayaavor Hu Mamash Bechinas Ivor. The word of Yavor is really the inyan of pregnancy, conception. Just say pregnancy. V'chein timsaki milas Yavor. So you find like this. This is what the word Yavor, Haim Osius Ivor. It's the same word. V'amnam Ivor zeh sodo hu b'bechinas Leah. So this Ivor, we're talking about what? Is the aspect of Leah. Who is Leah? Leah is the Nukva Elyana de Zer Anpin. She's the upper female. Wow, I'm not showing this good. She's the upper female aspect of Zer Anpin. Okay, now what we're going to see here is an answer to a question that I've had, and I've been asking this question. He keeps talking about the yichud between Yaakov and Leah above the chazan. So I think we got the idea that above the chazan was to tell us that that's really where she's at. She can spread all the way down to the level of Yaakov. Maybe Yaakov goes up. I don't really know, but she can spread. Now let's understand where Yaakov is. Who is Yaakov? So Yaakov is the husband, his real wife, or the wife that he intends is Rachel. It's Yaakov and Rachel who make the reproduction. But wait a minute, we're saying over here he also reproduces with Leah. So how does it work? How does it work? What's the secret? So we have a couple of minutes. Let's just read number Aleph, and then we'll see. To me, this is okay. It's exciting. I have to try to keep myself in check. He said so we're just in a light print now. V'drash zeh mavar harav barichos. Now it's going to go into depth. Od pratim v'biurim be'inyan kevanas Yavor. More detail on what happens when you say that word. But the Chida Bevar ha'inyan Vayaavor. So now we're explaining the whole idea of what's going on in Vayaavor. Yeshbo inyan shel ibor. Over there is a concept of pregnancy. Who's getting pregnant? Remez lekach. So the remez to this is shevimilas Vayaavor, and then in the words of Yavor, yeshnam as osem ma'osius shel amidah ibor. So he says it again. So he says that you have within the concept of Yavor, it's also the concept of impregnation or being pregnated. So he says number base is be'ez bevar Rav. So now the Rav explains she'a'iver hana'asik kan, the Iver that we're talking about here, b'tefilas Yavor, in the tefillah of Yavor, who but parts of Leah. That's where we're talking about the pregnancy of Leah. Shehi hanukva elyon Zer Anpin. She is Zer Anpin's upper wife. She'omedes ma'al parts of Rachel, and where is she? She stands on top of the parts of Rachel. Rachel hi hanukva hatachtaina. So Leah is the nukva elyona, and Rachel is the nukva tachton. Now I'm very excited about this. Do you have time to learn one more?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll take it one at a time. And I only went so far. It was a hard one later on for me. So it's a bir inyan sheshorish hanefashos v'haneshamos nimshachos malaya v'rachel. So he has a distinction, which I point out in my shiurim, is the difference between the nefesh and the neshama. So we have to see. He said, like again, his blurb says that the nefashos and the neshamos come from Leah and Rachel. So it comes from both of them, or it comes from one of them. Each one gets one. How's it work? So I say, Vir Inyan Zeh. So here we're talking about our neshamas. Where do our neshamas come from? You call neshama shalatachtainin because all of the neshamas in the lower worlds. So again, understanding the word neshama by itself means pneumius. I mean, we understand neshamas goes along with the word breathing and stuff like that. But it's neshamos are neshimos, I don't know. So, but at any rate, here we're talking about neshamas and pneumius. It says it called neshamos shalatachtoinim. So all the pneumius of the lower worlds, nimshachas min Leah v'Rachel. All of them come from these two, Leah and Rachel. Yes, nimshachas min Leah. There are those that come from Leah. Yes, nimshachas min Rachel, and those that come from Rachel. V'hinei noida. So it's no Leah nimshachal neshama nimshachal neshama. But we know that from Leah comes neshamos, because she's higher up, which means that she's more panimi. Omen Rachel nimshachos neshamos. So the concept of neshamos is coming from Rachel. Now let me just take a moment and go through these eyes again. The word neshama, there's other words for neshama and nafashos, which is oros, that they're light. So in the Shara Kudim, he starts to explain the nature of the lights. So he says that the lights are called, and I've mentioned this before, I have it in video where you can see it, is the concept of Naranchi. So Naranchi tells you an order of the lights. From the bottom to the top, there's Nefesh. That's the lowest order of light. Now light is the most pneumistic part of reality. Now just say, we don't mean the light that we're talking about here, we mean the light of the Ein Sof. That's the most pneumistic part of the reality. And so that's light. So the light gets refracted into four different ways. One of the lowest form of it is called a nefesh. The next one is called ruach. The next one is called neshama. This is also called by the acronym Naran. So the Naran actually enters into Partsufim. That's the pneumius we were talking about. And then there's another, the Naran Chi. The Chi part is Chaya Yehida. So Chaya is, we've already learned about this, is a Makif. But it's the weaker of the Makifim, because it comes in and it goes back out because it's too strong. But it's close enough. In other words, it surrounds the Pneumius. And so in such a way, it gets really right next to the Pneumius. It can come into the Pneumius but doesn't stay. So it's called a Makif. And in other places we saw in Birchus Kohanim, that we were talking about this on top of the head of Zeranpin, let's say. So, but let's say it's outside. And then on top of that is the Yechida. Yechida is a light that is so unbelievably far away and understandable that it never comes in. It always shines from the outside. But although we came and learned that you could bring it in the Birchus Kohanim. But that's a concept in the Ranchi. It's important to understand that you're waiting. The Neshama is more panimi than Nefashos. So let's go now to number Hey. So therefore, the way this has to go, if that's 100% correct, I thought he contradicted himself, but maybe didn't. He said, so therefore, if you're talking about Neshama, since they're supposed to come from Leah, then they have to start first. And then after that, their soul, they're not the nefesh part, and the nimshachos derech rachel. So what is he saying? Like it's a chain reaction, comes out of Leah. It is more panimi, and it comes to a clothing of it. So that's another way to look at Naranchi. Naranchi is one light clothing another one until you get the Chaya or Yechida, which are perhaps I think they're a different system, which I could show you sometime if we could get a visual. So he says, Aval miesh mi shenafsho But there are those who nefesh, which means the hitzonius part of the life, the nishmaso, and the more panimi part of the life, shtechem nimshachas min Leah, both of them come from Leah. Could go on hashvatim. Because look at the shvatim. You have the shvatim of the Bnei Leah, and then the Reuven, Shimon, Levi, so on and so forth. The eighth misha nafshav nishmasu shtechem min Rachel, but there are also people who have a nefesh and a neshama that comes from Rachel. Now just let me check one thing. Yeah. He put nefesh before neshama. So he said in the tribes, you see that the nefesh and neshama can come either from Rachel or Leah. So if, let's say you're from Leah, so that you're going to be a nefesh and neshama from her. You go in Bnei Rachel, Yomin. So for example, they have a nefesh and neshama that come from there. This is not the place, though. He says, I want to get into this. So you could see there's a door over there, and you could go in and see some fantastic stuff. I'm running out of steam, so let's do number Gimel, and I think I'm going to finish after we get to, well, we got a little ways to go, and so let's see what he says. So he said, there are two different kinds of Yichudim. One of them is for the purpose of giving birth to the interior light called neshama. So that's how he explains it. That's what the neshama means. It's where the life, the physical life is, and where the physical world, the strength of that is coming from the nefesh. So the Rav explains that the zibugim that takes place with Leah and Rachel, is all of those yichudim are for the purpose of bringing that energy of the neshamas down into the lower world. But there are neshamas that come from Leah. So therefore you have to have two different zibugim. Zivug Daas the Leah Vayaavor. So now he explains it, and we've seen this already 5 times. So Daas and Leah at Vayaavor, they have a yichud. The Zivug Yaakov and Rachel, but the Nefilas Apayim, and the yichud of Yaakov and Rachel takes place when we go to the Nefilas Apayim. Well, mostly the Rav the voice, and the Rav goes on and explains like this: the Sark L'das, you have to know. Shekol HaNeshamos HaNimtzos Kan B'Tachtainim, all of the neshamas that we find here in the lower worlds, Mikoram Ku B'Leah V'Rachel. So this is the importance of understanding what's going on now. He really came right to the answer to the question that I've been having. What do you need to make a yichud with Leah for? Because Rachel is the one that Yaakov wants. That's the one. So he said, but there's those that come from Leah, as we're going to explain. He's going to get into this. Now the Rav comes and explains further. There's a difference. A person has a neshama that comes from Leah. The bein misha nishmaso nimshachas ben Rachel are though the person whose neshama comes from Rachel. Here, neshama is mekorim b'Leah, because the neshama, the basic idea is that the deep depth of life is coming from Leah. V'hanefashos, which is the more physical, the chiyus part of it, is coming from Rachel. So he said, v'lekach b'derech klal. So generally speaking, you have to know this: tzrikos kulum la'avor derech shneim. That it is necessary that both of them have to go through both of the mothers. The at the beginning, and the neshamas of Beres derech Leah. So at the beginning, the neshamas start passing through Leah. Kavan shem neshama na'asid b'Leah, because the neshamas come out of Leah. And then after that, they pick up their nefesh v'nimshachas derech Rachel, and they go through Rachel. Now that makes good sense in the sense that Leah is on the top. Leah is the more panimi part, he's saying. It's an aspect of being itself. And Rachel is the lower part. She's the earth mother. It's kind of idea. But here we're talking about, in a general idea, let's understand that's the way they go. See, the Rov and the Neshamas, because the majority of Neshamas and Neshamas and Nimshach and Leah all come from Nimshach and Leah. If you want to know about Neshamas, they mostly come from Leah. But Nefesh ben Rachel, the life itself, the earth mother itself, Ach Yesh Yotzim HaKlal. But there are others, though. That's the way it goes. That's the way it should. It's normally that. But there's others that are not included in that. Sheish v'nafsham nishmasam nimshachas b'leah, because there's those who have both coming from Leah. So he said Leah. So he says like Leah, Reuven, Shimon, and Sharbonei Leah. All the rest of she has just 6 kids. I mean, it's a lot of kids. But there's also those Rabbi Neshama that comes, and a Nefesh that comes from Rachel. And who are those? Could go Neshvatim, B'nei Rachel, Shahim Yosef, B'Binyanim, V'ein Kan Mak Maharach, B'Devarim Elo. He says, we're not going to go into that, really walk into that door, go into it. Below Nimsa Bir Akdamazu, that then the Tiv adds on this. He says, but the truth is, and now that he mentioned all of that, below Nimsa Bir Akdamazu Yosef B'Kol Divrei Rav, he says, I've looked through the Divrei Rav, and I don't see this door anywhere to go into it. So the question is, so he said it, that's a fact, and that's where we're going to stop today.
Okay.
That was a lot of Torah today. Thank you so much for giving me your time.
Thank you. I was just making reference to Yisachar and Gematria, that's 830, which is the total time that the Bayis Rishon and the Bayis Sheni existed.
Because we were learning Torah all that time?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Okay, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.
You too. Call too.
Thanks so much.